Greetings. Welcome to our latest webinar at Sawtooth Software entitled Using ChatGPT as a Co-Pilot to Explore Research Data. And we're joined by our guest speaker, Ray Poynter, founder of New MR. We're grateful to have him, and I'll be introducing him in a bit. So I see that many are still joining. Welcome, everyone. Excited to be with you today. Just a few details on this webinar. We're here in Zoom, and you can see at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. We prefer you use that button to ask your questions, and don't use the chat. So the Q&A button at the bottom. You can go ahead and type in your questions during the webinar, but we won't be able to get to most of them until the end. We will have a time at the end for Q&A with Ray. Everyone who has registered for this webinar will be sent a recording. We're recording this webinar, and that will be sent out to everyone. We also have some slides that Ray has graciously agreed to share with the audience. Just want to make a plug here for some upcoming Sawtooth training. In a few weeks, we'll be here in Utah. We'll be giving our Sawtooth summer training event. This will be some amazing training on conjoint analysis, MaxDiff, and ACBC. We have market simulator instruction and market segmentation bootcamp. So I encourage you to check that out. The link here at the bottom of the screen, sawtoothsoftware.com/workshops. You'll be able to learn more about that event. And the one following that, which is our October event in London, we will be hosting a preference modeling event, talking about conjoint analysis, MaxDiff, key driver analysis, and market segmentation. So highly recommend that you check out these live events. We also would really encourage you to check out our software here at Sawtooth Software. We have some amazing platforms. We do conjoint analysis really well, and also MaxDiff. But we're also just a great general interviewing platform for any types of surveys that you'd like to run. We strive to be easy to use. We have world-class support. And you can try us for free by going to discover.sawtoothsoftware.com. So with that, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Ray Poynter. Ray Poynter has spent the last 45 years at the intersection of insights, research, and new thinking. He has held director-level positions with companies such as the Research Business, IntelliQuest, Millward Brown, and Vision Critical. Ray is committed to the research and insights industry, having been a member of ESOMAR for over 30 years and is a fellow of the MRS. He's actually president of ESOMAR. In recent years, Ray's work has focused on training, writing, speaking, and sharing. Ray has run training workshops for a variety of national and international organizations, including RANDS, TRS, JMRA, MRS, and ESOMAR. He has written textbooks. He's taught at Saitama and Nottingham Universities. He's a regular blogger and is active on social media. So with that, Ray, if you could turn on your camera and share your screen, we're excited to hear from you.
Thanks, Justin. I will do that. And hello, everyone. And we're going to be exploring some of the things you can do with ChatGPT. So here's the agenda. I'm going to start with a caveat. I think that's really important in this fast-moving area. I'm actually going to start with how you might design a study, then looking a little bit at qualitative information, but the big dive is going to be into the area of quantitative analysis. So I'm using ChatGPT 4.0. I'm using the team version. The team version is quite a good option. It's slightly more expensive than the standard plus. but it does default to not storing or learning about my stuff, and that's pretty important. You have to have at least 2 licenses to be a team. The next level above team is enterprise, and that's got even more wonderful features, but you need 150 licenses, and that gets pretty expensive, and you've got to find a lot of friends. The co-pilot I'm going to be talking about is, imagine you've got a learner, a new intern, a new employee. They're quite bright, they're quite knowledgeable, but they've got gaps in their knowledge and they make mistakes. So they can help you get more work done, but you need to be careful. Use it to start projects. Use it to give you something to amend, to correct and refine. It's great as a second pair of eyes to check what you've done, and it's useful to look things up. So imagine we're designing a study. So I type in a prompt to ChatGPT. I want to conduct a B2B market research study on behalf of my client who is thinking of launching a product to compete with Salesforce. The client wants to run a conjoint choice model study to understand the key drivers in procurement of customer relationship management software. Please describe the key attributes and levels to include in this study. And what happens then is you go into an interactive process. It comes up with 10 attributes. I think to myself, no, I don't want 10. I want 7. So reduce the attributes to 7. Now we have a look and we see what they are. And if this was a full example, I would be tweaking several of these. I'd be asking why it generated them, and we'd end up with a finished design. I then want to ask it things like how many tasks. So how many options to include in each task, how many tasks to show for each participant. It comes back with some ideas, and what you'll see on the screens that I'm showing you is I've highlighted occasional things in red. I'm not expecting you to read the whole screen at the speed I'm talking about, but the things that pop up in red are worth having a look at. So the number of options per task, it's suggesting 3 to 4 options per task. I tend to go with 4, but yeah, that's a reasonable suggestion to start with. Number of tasks per participant, very much in line with most modern thinking at the moment, 8 to 12 tasks. So that's quite acceptable. Then I ask it, should I include none of these? Because I'm relatively knowledgeable, I'm trying to develop my assistant to come along with me. It comes up with a whole range of reasons why none of these might be a good option. And then I ask it, how many people should I interview? It comes back with a rule of thumb, at least 300 respondents. It tells us that it's a lot to do with the complexity of the study. It's to do with the number of choice sets you've got. But it makes this nice point at the bottom that if my client is going to want to segment the data, then the sample size will have to be larger. And that's a useful point to be making. What software could I use to administer this research? And I'm sure Justin and all of his colleagues, Brian and so on, will be delighted to see the first one on the list that it came up with was Sawtooth, came up with Qualtrics. It said, well, if you've got a simple conjoint study, you could use SurveyMonkey. And it came up with a couple of other suggestions. Conjointly, if I remember correctly, was one of them. So I now move a little bit further forward. I intend to conduct the research in the USA with decision makers in the medium to large size corporations using Sawtooth software. Please design a questionnaire I can use. So it starts off with a nice welcome to the study, company size 100 to 499. It's taken me probably a little bit too literally at medium to large size because a medium-sized company can't be fewer than 100 people, but actually I need to make sure that I deal with it if one gets recruited. Are you a decision maker? We move into an interesting thing. It starts off by saying it wants simply to do an old-fashioned rating of importance on these 7 attributes. And then it tells us that we're going to be presented with several sets of CRM software. And each one of these has got a none of these. So we can see the attribute levels. We can see the attributes, the choices, the tasks. It's going to repeat this for 10 combinations. It's going to ask a few demographics. Now, what happens when I really use ChatGPT is I'm spending a lot of time, I'm adding 2 or 3 demographics, I'm changing them, but it's quite nice to get that sort of framework coming through. It then tells me how I'd implement that in Sawtooth software. So we're going to define the attributes and the levels using the Sawtooth interface. We're going to create choice sets using the automatic choice set generator. Set up screening questions, deploy the survey, all that sort of parts and processes within that. So when we're designing research, we're going to treat ChatGPT as a source of ideas, as a starting point. We're going to refine the design with our own knowledge. We're going to ask it why it's picked things. Ask it if there could be drawbacks of that option. Ask it if there are alternatives. And a really nice question are to say, is there a custom and practice rule about this? Are there rules of thumb that can guide me to where I need to be in this area? It won't write a study for you, but it will help you design one. The next topic I want to talk about is, before we get into analysis, we always need to check and clean the data, especially if it's come from online panels. There are immense problems with data quality with most online panels. So we can ask ChatGPT to do this. Now, there are some great tools using APIs, but we can do some basic stuff with the web-based interface, checking for things like, are there duplicates, missing data, etc. So the way you upload a file into ChatGPT, if you've not done it, is you use the little paperclip. Click on the paperclip and you can upload it from Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive, or more likely from your computer. So I created some data. It's really got quite a lot of bad data in it, considering there are only 6 participants in this data. So I've got this dummy. You can see that ID 3 is repeated twice. We can see that we've got some missing data for ID 2. And at the bottom, we have something that looks like a bad piece of data entry. The NPS rating was a 3. How was your visit Monday? Above that, we've got some personally identifiable data from bogus@test.com. So are there any duplicates? Yes, there's a duplicate entry in the data. Here's the duplicate row. Would you like me to remove it? Yes, please remove the duplicate. Are there any cells with missing data? It says, yes, there's a cell with missing data. Would you like me to handle it in a specific way? For example, filling it with a specific value, or putting in the mean of the column, or some other option. No, I'm happy to leave that as a missing value. I want to remove any responses which might be from bogus participants, or participants that are not concentrating and giving valid answers. Are there any values which suggest a participant is not giving valid and useful information? And it suggested 2 cases. Well, the first one of those, ID 1, has given me an NPS of 3. How was your visit? Okay, I'm happy with that. It thinks it's possibly not good. I disagree. So I'm going to tell it to leave that one. Then it comes up with this 5th ID, NPS rating 3. How was your visit Monday? Yeah, that's somebody not paying attention, or it's a bot, or it's just somebody trying to earn the incentive. So I'm going to delete that one, remove ID 5. Final check I'm going to run is check each record to see if there's any PII, personally identifiable information. It goes through and it tells me, yes, there is one entry, email me bogus@test.com. So what does it want? What am I supposed to do about that? I tell it to replace it with John/Jane Doe, but leave all the rest of the field as it is. Then I'm going to export the file as a CSV. I can export it as Excel. I can export it in a variety of formats. Click on there, and I'm going to get the downloaded file. That generates this cleaned up data like this. So we're going to use things like this frequently to help us clean the data. It shouldn't be the only thing you do to clean the data, but it can be one of the first things you do to reduce other steps you need to do. We can use it to help us write code and as a reference. So, for example, if I want to know how to find the correlation between two sets of data in Excel, I ask it, and it shows me that you can use the correl function, or you can use the data analysis toolpack. We can also ask it how to write code. So here I'm looking at it using Google Script. How can I write a program for Google to take a column of text, read it in, auto-translate it into English, and paste it into the adjacent column? It tells me how to do that. It also gives me the code. I can click now on copy code. I can paste that in as a Google script, and I can run it. So just going to show you an example of what happens when I did that. I have taken the script created, suggested by ChatGPT, copied it into my script editor, linked it to this worksheet, and I've put in some text here in a range of languages. So if I select this text, I can then click on the run button, and I've linked this run button to the script that ChatGPT suggested. I get a message that it's running, and we see that it's translated Salut le monde, Hallo Welt, Salve Mundi, etc. into Hello World. Now, just before moving on, I could have done that for VBA, for Excel, if I were using a Microsoft operating system. If I'm using a Mac, it's actually a little bit flaky. It struggles to write VBA for Excel on a Mac. So not everything is equally good. Now let's think about qualitative information. So open-ended comments, social media comments, online discussions, depth interviews, focus groups, etc., even images. So this is from a new MR study that we did earlier this year, which was looking at how people are using artificial intelligence. So I uploaded the data. I asked it to show me all the questions in the file, and I'm going to pick this one at the bottom, which was an open-ended question. Looking forward 2 years, what impact do you think AI will have on research and insights? So I ask it to conduct a cluster analysis of this open-ended text in question 14, and then to describe the clusters. I could also have said, show me the themes, but I chose to ask it to create clusters. The first cluster was about cautious optimism, and it describes what that was like. Then there are people who are talking about the integration challenges over the next 2 years. There are people who talk mostly about efficiency and automation, and there are people who talk about significant impacts. So we can see that there. We can then pull some information about those groups. So show me a table showing how often each cluster is used in this file. Comes back and it shows me that cautious optimism was the most frequent category, followed by those people who were talking about integration challenges. The significant impact group, by the way, were not overly interesting. They, when asked, how do you think AI is going to be impacting our industry, they tend to say things like, in a big way, which of course is true, but it's not necessarily helpful for diagnosing which way to take things. Create a table with the comments in column 1. So this is the raw comments that I had uploaded. And in column 2, put the name of the cluster it's allocated into. And then in column 3, put a sort of sentiment analysis. But what I want is specifically, does this person think that the world in 2 years is going to be better? Is it going to be worse? Or is it unclear? And so we can get that sort of coding. We can then export that as an Excel file, because we might want to add that to some tables data we've got. We might be looking at open ends. we can download this and bring it into somewhere else. And this is what that data would look like if we downloaded it and loaded it into Excel or whatever. So let's move into quant, and we're moving into simple quant to start with. So this is another new MR study. This is from a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago. We've got 527 people from all around the world. So I can ask it to do questions like this, like a sort of tables package almost. Create a table with, were you involved in creating that report or in receiving it as the columns, and how would you describe the quality of that report as the rows? And it comes back with a table. It's got counts in there, and it's got the order alphabetical, which is across the top, which isn't particularly useful for me. So add a total row and a total column and move the other to the last 3 columns and reorder the rows so that the very poor is at the top and excellent is at the bottom. And it generates this table here, still counts. In my tables, do not show decimal places. Change the values in the cells to be column percentages, but leave the totals as counts. For the percentages, display a percentage symbol. And now I've got something much more conventional looking. We've got the bases effectively at the bottom. We've got the column percentages. We can see what's going on, and we can start to understand this information. Now I want to add a row that adds the top 2 boxes together, i.e. very good and excellent, and label the row top 2 boxes. So it's added in this row. And now we see quite an interesting difference between the 2 sets. The people, 69% of the people creating the reports thought they were top 2 boxes good. And 36% of people receiving market research reports thought the top 2 boxes were good. We can then ask it whether or not there are significant differences between the views of those creating and receiving reports. Now, one of the interesting things when you start using ChatGPT to do that is it normally uses the right tests. So instead of using some version of the t-test or the normal test, which you will often see in market research, it looks at it and it says, oh, right, that's a chi-squared test, which is what we all did when we were at university, but not what we always do commercially. And it runs the chi-squared test and it says, yes, there is a significant difference between the views of the people writing reports and the people receiving the reports. I have a hunch that over the next 2 to 5 years, we will start using the correct statistics when we're testing things more often, because the more AI is looking at the problem, the more it's going to suggest the right tests, unless we train it to behave like commercial market researchers. I could also, rather than ask it to produce tables for me so that I can read the information and come to a view, maybe we get a first draft by just simply asking it to analyze it. So review this data and write a brief report that highlights the main differences between those people who say they create reports and those who receive the reports. Now, it's come up with some stuff on the left, which we can go into, but look at the summary, and it's not quite got what I meant by this. And this is where we need to iterate quite often. The main difference between those who create and receive reports is in their roles and experience levels. So if somebody is client side, they are more likely to be receiving reports. If they are agency side, they are more likely to be writing reports. True, but not useful. We wouldn't highlight that as a finding. ChatGPT highlighted as a finding. However, it has also said that the people writing them have a better opinion of than the people receiving them. We can make that very explicit by saying, is there a difference between how good these 2 groups think the reports are? And it makes the point that both groups think they're good, but the receivers think they are less good, and the writers think they are better. And additionally, it's gone a little bit further than I had asked it for, which is quite nice. It's a smart intern. Additionally, both groups largely agree that the quality of reports had remained consistent over the past 2 years at that point. We can also use it to help generate our thinking around visualizations of the data. So show me 5 visualizations of this data in terms of creators versus receivers. And it comes up with some charts here showing that we've got a different shape really between the quality rating for the creators, which is quite peaked on very good, and the quality rating of the receivers, which is rather flatter between fair, good, and very good. This is the quality change chart, pretty similar between the two. Then it suggests some pie charts. So it hasn't come up with some wonderful, wonderful charts, but they are at least useful as ideas. Quick tip while we're talking. These are all images. If you export them, they will come out as images. If, however, you have a visualization you like, if you tell ChatGPT, I'd like you to create a PowerPoint slide for me with that chart, I would like you to create the chart as a PowerPoint chart object, and then get it to export the PowerPoint slide, it will give you editable outputs. You still have to tweak things like the size of the fonts, but you can tweak them because they're not just an image. Okay, let's move to something a little bit more interesting. This is looking at driver analysis. You can also get ChatGPT to generate these cheesy images. So this is driver analysis about hotels. So again, we have to create prompts that are really specific about what we want to do. I run a market research agency. My client is a US hotel chain, and they want to create a CX tracking study for their 200 US hotels. The study should measure satisfaction with the key services and the overall NPS score. Suggest a research design for this project. Assume that we will want to send email invitations to an online survey to customers the day after they check out of their hotel. We will include the name of the hotel they stayed in the invitation from the hotel's records. It comes back with a whole lot of stuff, and I do a 2-hour session really on this, and we're not going to go through any of that. Just this one piece of the outcome. It said, okay, let's ask an overall satisfaction question first, with very dissatisfied through to very satisfied. Then we're going to ask a net promoter score. Then we're going to ask satisfaction with room cleanliness, comfort of the bed, quality of the food, customer services, hotel amenities. And we're going to use the same 5-point satisfaction scale that we use for overall satisfaction. My client wants to understand how to improve their NPS scores. What are my options for using this data to conduct a driver analysis? To help your client understand it, it suggests doing the following. We could do correlation, and it tells us the benefits. We could do regression analysis, and it tells us the benefits. We could use relative importance analysis, for example, Shapley values, and it tells us the benefits. And it also says we could use structural equation modeling. I'm ruling that one out. It takes too long. It's too expensive. So I'm going to home in on the other 3. So let's try correlations first. Show me the correlations between each of the satisfaction scores and the likelihood to recommend question. Rank the answers from highest to lowest. And we see overall satisfaction, not surprisingly, at the top. Room cleanliness, comfort of the bed, hotel amenities at the bottom. This is from some synthetic data which had some biases built into it. I used ChatGPT to create the synthetic data so that I was able then to look for the patterns that came out. Room cleanliness being really important was one of the biases. Hotel amenities being really unimportant was one of the biases that I built in. Now let's look at regression. Use regression to calculate the importance of each of the satisfactions in terms of NPS question. And it comes back with the coefficients, and it then sums those to 100%, and it tells us which ones are the most important. And we see, again, room cleanliness coming out as very important. We see hotel amenities coming out as not important. However, I would have liked ChatGPT, if I was a really novice user, to have said, you better check that regression is appropriate for this analysis. So I'm now asking ChatGPT, are there any things we need to check when using regression in this way? And it comes up with a whole bunch of things. In fact, it comes up with 7 things we need to check. Independence of errors, linearity, etc., but multicollinearity. So I ask it to check for multicollinearity. And it comes back with the VIF scores like it should do. And it very nicely tells us, as it should do, that values above 10 are a problem. Some people like them to be below 5. We certainly don't want them above 10. So that's useful to know. So let's try Shapley values. Use the Shapley values approach to generate a driver analysis for this data and produce a table that shows the results. So it produced lots and lots of intermediate pages, just showing you the final one it came out, and slightly different now. Overall satisfaction is a chunk ahead of room cleanliness because of the prioritization that happens with Shapley value. But pretty much everything else is very similar. Hotel amenities coming out again really low. So I can then ask it to show me the results of the 3 approaches side by side. And despite the really red flag on using regression analysis, what we see is that there is broad similarity between the 3 approaches. Overall satisfaction is really important, not surprisingly, and I'm going to come to that point in a moment. Room cleanliness up there, and hotel amenities really, really low in that process. I ask it to summarize what's going on, and it comes back with these conclusions: that the overall satisfaction of room cleanliness is most important, secondary factors, nearly everything else. But quite a nice point that the average intern might miss. Hotel amenities, while still important, can be a lower priority unless specific feedback indicates otherwise. So we don't just go with the numbers. We think about the context. What do the numbers mean? What can we do with them? But this is something that I wish ChatGPT had said. Now I have to go to my intern and say, you know what? If I'm conducting a driver analysis for satisfaction data for hotels with the aim of improving the NPS score, should I include a measure of overall satisfaction along with things like satisfaction with the amenities, room cleanliness, and the comfort of the bed? It's come back with quite a long answer, but no, we shouldn't do, because of multicollinearity and causal understanding. It should have been removed. Would have been fantastic. And maybe if we uploaded custom GPTs and we told it some of our rules in the future, it would highlight that at the beginning rather than me having to ask it, is that a problem? So use your Copilot to start projects. Use it to give you something to amend, to correct, and to refine as a second pair of eyes, and also to look things up. So here is an example of one of the problems. At the end of that section on Conjoint earlier, when I was preparing it, I said, is there a good book I can read to help me design conjoint studies? And it came back with the book by Brian Ormes. I'm sure we're all very happy with that. And it came back with 3 other books. But I did what I normally do, which is I check that the books are there. This book doesn't exist. So I asked Conjoint and Multicollinearity, are you sure this is a real publication? And it comes back and apologizes for making that mistake and suggests this is actually the book. Now, this book does exist. You can buy it for $125 in the Kindle version, but it is actually out there. I don't get many hallucinations when I'm working with numbers. I always do periodic check. I do cross-checking. If this is true, then this must be true. Let's see if that is true, and looking at things like that. It is much more prone when it's actually pulling up this factual stuff, like who wrote which books, where did they work, and things like that. So that is one of the things we need to be aware of. And then finally, and just before we jump to the Q&A, I asked it at the end of creating this presentation you've just seen, please check this presentation and tell me about any mistakes or bad errors. Tell me the slide number and then tell me the error. And it came up with a couple of pages of mistakes, and I went through and I corrected them. But one of them is not a mistake, and the font's too small for you to read, but so I'll read it to you. Slide 4 context, error. I am using ChatGPT 4.0. That should say I'm using ChatGPT 4. That is because ChatGPT 4.0 final date for learning was before ChatGPT 4.0 was released. It doesn't know about ChatGPT 4.0, which is kind of a strange philosophical situation. It's really knowledgeable about lots of things, but it doesn't even know about itself because it was launched after its last reference update from the learning database. So thank you for that, for listening to that. That was a whistle-stop tour. And I think we are going to now switch over to Justin.
Yeah, that was excellent, Ray, and brilliant. You're a great presenter and a fascinating topic. I've dabbled around with ChatGPT, but my mind is blown what it can do. I was actually, we're going to go into the Q&A section here, but I have a question of my own related to what you just ran into. I was doing a computer science, kind of computer programming task with ChatGPT. And as you may know, one of the ways that computers keep track of time is through a Unix timestamp. And this is the number of seconds since January 1st, 1970, that kind of keeps track of time that way. So I had a timestamp, right, a bunch of numbers, and I pasted it into ChatGPT and I said, can you tell me what time this is? What does this date represent in a human readable format? And it came out and said a certain, date and time and year, and it was wrong. And I knew it was wrong. And so then I said, this is wrong. And it said, oh, I'm sorry. Let me try again. And then it got it right. So that is just mind blowing to me. Like, how much trust can we put in it when it runs into mistakes like that? And luckily, I knew the right answer. I just don't understand why it would give the wrong answer. But then when told it was wrong, it then got it exactly right. So it knew how to get it right, but for some reason it got it wrong the first time. Do you have any thoughts on that, or how do you trust something that might be wrong?
Well, we don't trust it entirely yet. So you need the cross-referencing. So you have to ask it questions that you know the sense to. In the mix, there are going to be some things there.
Yeah.
If we are doing things like I was showing with correlation analysis, we are going to be running a few of those elsewhere in a tables package or in Excel or whatever. And I'm also making sure that things add up. It makes fewer problems when it's doing stats, because what it's often doing is calling libraries. So when it's calling libraries, you're pretty much down to, is it calling the right library? But there are some peculiarities. It's actually quite bad at multiplying together two really large numbers. Gets them in the ballpark. And like 12-digit number times a 12-digit number, because it's not actually a computing AI. It's a language AI. So it's learning that from the language. But yes, that's a lovely example of the Unix timestamp of the sort of thing we need to
But
watch
again,
for.
the mind-blowing part is that it knew the right answer. This when I said you made a mistake, then it had the right answer. And it's
Yeah.
like, well,
And
why didn't you give me that the first time?
well, it'd be when we run ChatGPT, it runs with a temperature of 0.7. So temperature on ChatGPT runs from 0, very little randomness, through to 1, lots more randomness. And I wonder if you were running the API version, because in the API version, you can adjust the temperature. If you run it with 0, it might always get that timestamp right. That 0.7 creativity is probably not always our friend when we're doing stats and numbers.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to switch to my screen for just a second here. So just a reminder of our upcoming training events in July and October. Would encourage you to check out sawtoothsoftware.com/workshops to learn more about those. Would also encourage you to check out our Discover product by going to discover.sawtoothsoftware.com. So with that, we're going to go into the Q&A section. Ray, I think it's probably best if you both read the question and answer it. The way you can do that is if you click on that Q&A button at the bottom, you can just start at the top there and read the question. And then once you answer it, just click answer live and then move to the next. Looks like we have 18 current questions. So take it away, Ray.
Yeah. Okay, so the first question, what aspects of market research would become redundant with the rise of general AI? Also, what skills will become critical for a researcher to possess? So general AI is, for most of us, a step beyond what we've seen here. It's where it can teach itself, where it won't be making mistakes. And a lot of thinking tasks are likely to be that way when we go into general AI. But I think that is some way down the road. If we think about what might happen in the next 2 years and 5 years, then what we're going to see is people who are not leveraging AI are going to be disadvantaged. Obviously, anybody who is doing coding of open ends is likely to be problematic. I think that a lot of basic processing, a lot of creating of dashboards, things like that are going to be problematic. Talking to the end users, explaining what the results mean, thinking about the right projects to run are all going to be more and more important. So it's going to be a good time for people with 5 to 20 years experience to be able to leverage that and drive the process forward. What I would say as a warning, though, is don't keep replicating what you're doing at the moment. So I don't think in the future we will analyze tables with humans. I think that we do not want to get the AI to write better tables, because that isn't the route we're going to be going down. I think that qualitative researchers, semioticians are going to be in a very good place because that stuff where you can't capture the information as text, where you can't capture the information as photographs, are going to be places where humans are going to be really important within that. In terms, next question down, what file formats do you recommend for feeding data into ChatGPT? Does it handle some formats better than others? I tend to upload it in Excel file format. It's very happy with Word. It's very happy with PowerPoint. It's very happy with PDFs, CSVs. But in terms of my cross-checking, as I was just talking about with Justin, then if I've got it in Excel and I've got it in ChatGPT, it's easier to do the cross-checks. Next question. For these features of ChatGPT, you have to pay for the plus version, right? For some of them, there are lots and lots of things. So asking it to design a study, doing some analysis of data, yeah, you can do a lot of that in the free version. The next version is the plus version, which I think is $20 a month. The next version up, which is the one that I would probably recommend for anybody using it commercially, is the team version, where you have to buy at least 2 licenses and they're $25 a month each. You should be able to save more than $50 a month in your costs and overheads by using it. But quite a lot of this stuff is available in the free version, but not all of it. As far as confidentiality goes, how would we deal with that as a financial firm wanting to use ChatGPT? Is it safe to use clients' private information in the generator? What kinds of disclosure would we need to do? Okay, so if you are using the team version, if you are using the enterprise version, you have a contract with them not to look at your data, that they're not learning from your data. That's a little bit like when you store it in Dropbox. It's a bit like when you use Google Translate to translate some open ends. So with my information, I am relatively comfortable. You can get, if you're dealing in Europe, a GDPR statement of what's happening to the data as well, and that's all fairly useful. But lots of my clients do not consent for their information to be uploaded. And even if they do, they want to see the ISO, they want to see the service agreement all filled out and all of those details. Disclosure, you absolutely must tell clients if you are uploading their data anywhere. So yes, you should tell them if you're uploading it to ChatGPT, but frankly, if you're uploading it to a Google Drive, you should be telling them as well. And you should be telling them if AI has generated the outputs. I think you should be telling them that AI has generated part of the outputs, but then you have used a human to make sense of it and to finish the process, but you should be telling them. How does ChatGPT deal with large Excel files that contain all the fields in a typical project, might have 600 columns and 10,000 rows? That, I've not tried exactly that size, so you would need to. It's getting much better at handling large files. The limits keep going up, and the more you use it, quite often the more your limits go up. It's actually restricted by a thing called tokens. And the number of tokens you can use in the free version, in the web version, are more limited than if you're using the API version. If you start using a lot of really big files, you might want to be looking at the API version where you're actually paying for the data transfer. However, for some types of files, you can simply upload the file, and what it does, and it would certainly handle 10,000 rows of 600 columns, it keeps going back to the file rather than ingesting it. So if you imagine, we think of it like a computer. So we've got memory, we've got some of the files in RAM, and we've got some on the hard disk. It can behave like that, where you upload it, it puts it on the hard disk equivalent, and it can then access it. Can it create the design matrix for CBC study? If you uploaded the CBC data into the app, can it estimate the part worths? I don't know. You'd need to try that. But I would use Sawtooth for that. Which clustering algorithm does it use? It will normally tell you which algorithm it uses. So that was Leighton Dirichlet on that particular one, but it will suggest them and you can make choices, and sometimes it will meet your choices. So you could tell it you wanted a latent class or something like that. So yes, the recording will be available. Question there about whether the recording will be available. So what APIs do you suggest command for data checking? So I check a lot of the stuff simply by asking it some more questions to say, well, if that's true, now show me this into three groups. And then I'm looking to see if the three groups add back to the total picture. I'm doing some stuff in either SPSS or Excel because I've got that data externally as well. And that's how that's how we pull that together. How far can I go using the free ChatGPT? I wouldn't put confidential data up there. I think using it for all of your learning, using it as a fantastic encyclopedia to look things up. So most people I know now, most programmers I know, have it open almost all the time to say, oh, what's the command in R that does this? I have it open. Oh, what's the command key sequence in Excel to do this? So it's really useful. Those sort of things, helping design projects, things like that. But I'd be a little bit more careful about confidential information in the free version. Have you tried, whoops, have you tried to import conjoint utilities to get preferences, best optimized product? No, I haven't by and large used it for conjoint stuff because I use Sawtooth software for conjoint stuff. I can see at some point in the future I will, but I think it would be great for somebody to do a paper specifically on key conjoint tasks and which ones does it do and which ones does it not do. So the question about proprietary information we've covered in confidentiality. So I think OpenAI is trying to bury ChatGPT 3.5. You can still select it, but I think they want 4.0. If you're doing the plus version, you get them all at the same price. So, and I think the free version is now 4.0 as well. So really, it is a lot better. You get smarter answers, you get better explanations, you seem to get fewer hallucinations. So as I understand it, do I need to upload the data set to ask to analyze the data? Yes. Is the data set deleted after I finish ChatGPT session? That is my understanding on the Teams version. On the Plus version, you can arrange for it to be deleted. I'm not sure on the free version, so I wouldn't use the free version with clients' information. Would you still do qual to find the attributes for a CBC study? In a study where I would currently do qual, I would still do qual, but I might use have a chat with ChatGPT first. But I might also then have a chat afterwards to say, I'm doing this study in some of the poorer regions of the cities. Are these with a lot of people who have not finished high school? Is the wording of these attributes and levels clear enough, or should I be modifying it? So we can start doing questions like that. We can start asking whether there are communities who might find this wording offensive and sort of things that we've not necessarily checked well in the past. How can we ask ChatGPT to save our preferences for analyzing data and apply to future data sets by adding top two boxes? So there's a thing called custom GPT, which allows you to configure things, allows you to upload instructions. So if you were Sawtooth, for example, you could upload the entire of Brian's and Keith's writings and stuff and say, this is the right way to do it. And that would be the set of defaults that it would then run to. You can put up your house style in there. You can put up instructions in your custom GPT, and it adds those instructions and that knowledge to the existing database and to what you type in. So this is include taking up Justin's point about the wrong answer and then the right answer. How do we ever know that we can trust it? We will start trusting it when it keeps being consistently right. Till then, I keep cross-referencing exactly like I do with a junior member of staff or a new starter. I will check a sample of their work for years, frankly. So what stats packages is it using? It's pulling Python libraries. I can't tell you exactly which ones, but when it is moving outside its normal zone, it tends to pull Python libraries. Sorry, I'm going to change that answer slightly. When I run it, it pulls Python libraries. I was talking to a programming friend recently, and it uses different libraries when he does it. So that could be something about the way I'm asking the questions or the context of the other information that makes it more likely to pull Python libraries. So this lovely question here. So when I'm asking it to assign questions to columns and rows, add totals, etc., are you placing the actual question wording in the prompt labels, or are you using the Excel's column labels data file? I vary, but quite often I can just say, put the question about regions across the top and the one about organization status down the side. I don't have to remember the exact wording. That's where it being a language model really comes in. And I can also do things like now do that for the other two questions without having to specify what the other two questions are. Have I tried to use it to extract conjoint attributes and levels from qualitative research? No, but that's a very interesting idea. You mentioned earlier that the methods we use in university are often different from what we use in commercial market research. Could you give a few examples of this? Yeah, I've got a whole bunch of different tests that I've run, and I've got the results down there. And I want to know whether some of those results are higher than others. So what I will often see people do, I won't own up to it, is they will run t-tests. A with B, A with C, A with D, A with E, B with C, B with D, B with E. At the very least, you should do something like a Bonferroni correction. But really, you should be using an ANOVAR to see whether or not there are differences overall. And if there are, you should be using one of the tests like Turkey's test, which actually looks properly to see if you've got differences in there. That would be a really good example of where at uni you would tend to do it right. And out in the real world, people tend to just do a whole sequence of t-tests inappropriately. So it's mind-boggling. When you ask for cluster analysis, what is it doing? There are lots of different algorithms for that. You can ask ChatGPT to explain itself, is the first point I'd make. So when I asked it to cluster the text, what it did, it converted all of the text into vectors, and it talked about the difference between the vectors created by turning text into vectors, and used that as a difference matrix that it fell into the latent Dirichlet. How do you handle confidentiality? And we've covered that. What about university students? What should be taught today's marketing research class? So getting to the source of it in a workshop that I run, one of the things we do is using ChatGPT to help understand a client's brief, help understand what questions we should be asking the client in order to design research that's going to meet their needs better. These are the sorts of things I think we should be teaching the students to do. We should be teaching them very much about thinking of asking for solutions and then trying to work out this cost-benefit trade-off. This will take longer, this will be more expensive, but this is going to be valuable. What are your thoughts about synthetic data for surveys? Okay, we're going to split this into two categories: augmented data and pure synthetic data. So augmented data is really used as an alternative to weighting data. You've done a study and it turns out you've got too few young men in the study. So you can use, you could upweight them, and that is pretty clunky. There are techniques out there like SMOTE, which will generate some lookalikes and some variations of that, or you can use AI to generate synthetic data, which looks at the distribution, which fits the pattern to it, and puts that information in there. In a way, it's a little bit like using hierarchical Bayes, where we have actually missing cases, we have missing observations, and we generate from the total population what the subgroups should look like. That is fairly robust. It's coming along well, but you need to make sure that clients understand that if you've only got 50 young men, it's still only 50 young men. It may be a bit better, but it's then just weighting it, but it's not fundamentally different. What we're seeing as well, though, are people starting to create personas and then asking those personas questions. I have seen studies that show it works, and I have seen studies that show it doesn't work. And that is down to the cases and the situations. There is a lot more work to do it. So there is no simple answer about whether synthetic data will work or not. It will work for some purposes. It will not work for other purposes. I'll give you a really good example of where it will not work. Let's say you're doing the customer satisfaction surveys for McDonald's, and you're doing 1,000 different McDonald's branches in North America, and you're getting 30 interviews a week. There is no way that synthetic data will tell you that Kevin in branch 455 is started behaving badly. Real data might, but you're not going to get that from the synthetic data because it's only ever learning from hypothetical, or it might pretend that Kevin is behaving badly when he isn't, which would be even worse. So that would be an example of a study which pretty much can't be synthetic data. There might be other ways of generating information by looking at sales, by looking at sales by person and generating some of that information.
Hey, Ray, we're at time, but
Oh,
we're
right.
happy to go. We're happy to go longer if you're willing to. We got 8 more questions. Are you happy to?
Okay, let's shoot through those 8. Yes.
Yeah, and we'll record this. So if participants have to take off, they can, and we'll send you the recording. But we'll just keep going. Thanks, Ray.
Okay, thanks for the heads up. In asking ChatGPT to compare the groups, creators versus receivers, and how they perceive the reports, can we trust that the difference it called out in its summary is statistically significant? We actually had seen that earlier because we tested it, but we can ask it to test that for statistical significance as well. So we've already done the one on APIs, Justin. Any experience that you use ChatGPT for segmentation? No, I've not used it for asking to name the segment, and that's great because I'm rubbish. And maybe it would be better. I normally ask qualitative researchers to help me with that in terms of naming segments when we've done clustering, but I think that would be a really good use. So we've already done the one about the mind-boggling and cluster analysis. What does it look like for online survey programmers? Any recommendations? Yeah, manage the process. Be in charge of implementing AI. A lot of programming surveys is clearly going to be automated. So be focused on the ones which can't be. Be in charge of bringing in the AI programs. Don't be doing just the regular programming of surveys. Because that is going to change. It's also going to facilitate a lot more of the chat-based surveys. Can I ask ChatGPT to specifically use our library to run a particular analysis? I don't know. Try it. my hunch is yes, but it may not be true. What are the most commonly used statistical tests for commercial data analysis applications? Specifically, what test would you recommend over the chi-squared test and a p-test for analyzing data in a business or commercial setting? I would use the academic ones. I don't usually. I tend to use the ones that are built into the software. If you think about how often, as an undergraduate or postgraduate, you use ANOVA and how rarely you use it when you get out in the commercial world, I think that is going to be one of the big changes that is going to happen. We're going to see fewer t-tests and more other sorts of tests coming through. Perhaps ones that also start looking at what the distribution is, because we normally don't have a random probability sample with a normally distributed variable. And then
Ray,
I think is all of them.
that's it. Great presentation. And then you knocked out 33 questions. We had a great audience here. We wish we could all be live. That would be even better. But we are just so grateful for you and your knowledge over all these years. Excellent. Really appreciate everything. And with that, we'll wrap it up. See you guys at our next webinar. Thank you.
Bye all.